Good day, and thank you for joining us. My name is Dr. Burnell, and I'm the medical advisor for AOR. And today I'll be talking about stress and insomnia. So some of the things I'll be discussing is stress. So what is stress? How does stress affect us? The impact of stress on our health, the leading stressors in our life, also things we can do to manage the stress in our life, and natural health products that can help us with sleep and stress. Now, first thing is to understand what stress is. So stress is a failure to respond appropriately to an emotional or physical threat, whether that threat is an actual threat or an imaginary threat. So basically, stress is a failure to cope properly. A good example of an imagined threat is bears. So a lot of us are scared of bears when we go camping. Meanwhile, the risk of getting in a car accident trying to get to a campground is far greater than any threat that we'd be exposed from bears. Now, if we look at the symptoms related to stress, stress is a state of alarm, and that's caused by the production of adrenaline. In the short term, we're very good at dealing with stress, and that's called resistance. Basically, that means that our body adapts so that we can cope with the stressor. The problem is that if the stress remains for a very long time, then we enter what's called exhaustion. And exhaustion, the symptoms there are going to be things like being very irritable because we're tired and exhausted. There's muscular tension, we're having a hard time to concentrate, and there's also headaches, elevated heart rate, and those are physiological reactions caused by the hormones that are being produced when we're stressed. Stress was actually first mentioned by a Canadian researcher. His name was Hans Selye, and he's known now as the father of stress. He was an endocrinologist, so he was looking at hormones and the effect of hormones in the body at McGill. At first, he thought he discovered a brand new hormone, but he then quickly realized that he was getting the same effects no matter what the irritating substance was. So basically, he was causing stress in the animals, and he was noticing things like swelling of the adrenal glands, ulcers in the gastrointestinal tract, symptoms of chronic stress and exhaustion. He also discovered that stress is unusual. So stress is different than other responses in our body because we experience stress whether the impulse is positive or negative. So very positive things, for instance, getting married, will cause stress, and the response is the same as something that would be highly negative, like being scared. He describes stress as having two components: general adaptive syndrome, that's basically our ability to deal with stress, but also the development of a pathology that's associated with chronic stress. Now, if we look at the general adaptive syndrome, the first phase or the first stage is the alarm reaction. This is the classic fight or flight, and it's caused by the release of adrenaline. So basically, we're releasing hormones to help us mobilize energy so that we can fight or flight. So the muscles tense up so that we can run or defend ourselves. The heart starts beating much faster. We're breathing more quickly, and that brings more oxygen and more nutrients to our muscles so that, again, we can run or defend ourselves. Our eyes dilate to improve our vision. We start sweating to decrease our core temperature, and digestion stops, so the stomach clenches. Now, once the stress is removed in the initial stage of stress, the body goes back to normal. So it's a completely reversible reaction. Now, the second stage is resistance, and this is a classic example of adaptation. So the stress stays the same, but now our adrenal glands are going to be releasing corticosteroids in an effort to sustain arousal. So we're trying to compensate for the stress that's being maintained in our life. The problem is that if the stress stays for too long, then we start depleting our resources, and then we go into negative stress, which is basically exhaustion. So we're running out of energy, our immune system becomes compromised, and we're getting low in resources, so we're not able to cope anymore. And so here you can see clearly what's happening in a graph. So the first phase, so this would be a normal baseline level of stress. Then there's an alarm reaction. We start compensating. And so this is now resistance. We reach a plateau where we're not able to maintain this, we're not able to cope with this level of stress anymore, and then we enter what's called exhaustion, and that's when we end up with disease like compromised immune system, ulcers, and the adrenal glands start to fail. Another thing that's important to understand is the autonomic nervous system, because it's a control system that helps us deal with stress. It's completely unconscious, so it's involuntary, and it controls visceral function like digestion, for instance, and it affects most systems in our body, so the cardiovascular system, digestion, breathing, salivation, so again digestion, perspiration. It affects our vision, urination, and even sexual arousal. And so here we can see the two sides of the sympathetic system. So there's, the autonomic system. There's the sympathetic and parasympathetic. Parasympathetic is when we're calm, rested. Sympathetic is when we're experiencing stress. And they're basically the opposite of each other. So when we're calm, the digestion goes on normally. So we produce saliva, peristalsis, secretion of digestive enzymes, secretion of bile. Urination is completely normal. The heart rate is normal. Breathing rate is normal. Now, when we're stressed, we see the opposite. So dilation of the pupils. We're not producing saliva anymore. That's why often when we're stressed, we have a dry mouth. Quicker heartbeat. We breathe more quickly. And we're not digesting. And so that would be when we're stressed. There's different ways of measuring stress. One of the scales is called the Holmes and Raw stress scale. Basically what those two researchers did is they associated a life event with a life change unit. So they basically rated different stress factors. And they looked at, they did a study to see if this scale could predict illness. And so they gave this scale, or this questionnaire, to 2,500 sailors. And basically they found that there was a positive relationship between stress and illness. And it was tested in different cultures, and the results were the same. And so here you can see, the higher the number, of course, the more stressful the life event would be. So the death of a spouse, divorce, separation, jail would be very, very stressful. But you can see here that some of the positive changes are even stressful. So vacation, Christmas, those are going to be stress factors as well. So this ends part 1. Please join us for part 2, where I'll discuss the leading causes of stress in our lives.